On a quiet city morning, a small scruffy dog ran straight toward a police officer, barking wildly, not with aggression, but with desperation. When she decided to follow, what she uncovered changed everything. Who was this dog trying to save, and why did it lead her to a child in hiding? One early morning, in a busy city full of life and sound, a small brown dog ran through the crowd. Its eyes looked desperate, scanning every face, darting between legs and dodging bicycles and early commuters with practiced agility. The city, a place where everyone had somewhere to be, and no one had time to look down, barely noticed the determined little animal. It wasn't just running, it was searching, urgently, as if its heart would burst if it didn't find what it was looking for. The smell of coffee, exhaust fumes, and breakfast carts floated in the air, mixing with the distant wail of sirens and the soft hum of car engines. Officer Karen Mitchell, standing at a street corner sipping her coffee from a paper cup, was just beginning her morning patrol when she spotted the dog heading straight toward her. At first she thought it might bite, but instead it stopped right in front of her and barked sharply, its tail low, eyes wide with urgency. Then, to her surprise, it tugged at her pants with its teeth, not viciously, but insistently, as if trying to say something no human words could explain. She looked into its eyes, and something stirred inside her. Karen, known in the precinct for her instincts and a heart too soft for the job, couldn't ignore the pleading look. "What's wrong, buddy?" she murmured, crouching down. The dog barked again, took a few steps away, then turned to see if she was following. She stood up, hesitated for a breath, then set down her coffee on the sidewalk. "All right, let's see what this is about," she said, adjusting her utility belt and starting after the dog. It led her through streets she knew and alleyways she didn't. The dog moved quickly, but always made sure she was close behind, pausing every few moments to check on her. As they passed street corners, homeless men peeked out from blankets and cardboard shelters, wondering what a police officer was doing chasing after a stray. A little girl holding her mother's hand pointed and giggled, but her mother pulled her along too fast to stop. Karen's boots echoed against the concrete as she kept up, thoughts racing. What was this? Where was it leading her? The dog turned sharply into an alley she had never noticed before, narrow, damp, lined with old brick walls and the smell of mildew and forgotten things. She hesitated at the entrance, looking back for a moment at the familiar street behind her. Then she stepped in. The dog barked again, more urgently now, and pushed its body against a pile of wooden crates stacked beside a rusted door. "What is it?" she asked, pulling out her flash. She gently pushed the crates aside, and then she saw it, a figure, small, unmoving. Her breath caught. It was a boy, couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, curled up, unconscious or asleep, dirt on his cheeks, and a deep purple bruise on his temple. Karen rushed forward, heart hammering, checking for a pulse. Alive, weak but alive. She called for backup immediately, her voice trembling, but firm. The dog sat beside the boy now, quiet, protective, as if it had finally done its job. Karen wrapped her jacket around the child, whispering soft reassurances. The boy stirred slightly, murmuring something that sounded like Max. She looked at the dog. "Is that your name?" she asked softly. The dog wagged its tail once, as if to say yes. By the time the ambulance arrived, the sun had risen higher, casting golden light through the alley's grimy edges. Paramedics took over, but Karen didn't leave. She watched as they lifted the boy gently onto the stretcher. The dog Max tried to jump up beside him, whining when they pulled him back. Karen knelt beside Max, holding his collar. "It's okay. He's safe now. You did good." Tears she didn't expect welled up in her eyes. She had seen a lot on the job: accidents, cruelty, desperation. But this was something else. This was love. Pure, determined love, from a creature who had no words but still found a way to scream for help. Later, at the hospital, she sat in the waiting room until a nurse came to give an update. The boy would be okay, dehydrated, malnourished, with a minor concussion, but he would heal. No one knew yet who he was or where he came from, but he had been found, and that mattered. Karen filled out her report with trembling hands. When asked why she followed the dog, she simply wrote, because it asked me to. Over the next few days, the story spread. The news picked it up. A brave stray saving a boy's life, a police officer who listened, a bond that formed without words. Donations came in. People called Max a hero. But for Karen it wasn't about the headlines. It was about that morning, that decision, that heartbeat moment when she could have finished her coffee and walked away, but didn't. Max stayed with her after that. No one claimed him, and she didn't try to find anyone. He had found his person. He slept on a soft bed in her apartment, curled up at her feet while she read or watched TV, always alert, always near. Sometimes, in her dreams, she saw the alley again, the boy's face, the way Max had looked at her, pleading for help with eyes more human than most. She woke up grateful every time, grateful for the strange dog who ran through the city one morning, with nothing but hope in its heart, grateful that she listened, and somewhere she believed the boy would remember too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day, he'd remember the dog who didn't give up, and the officer who followed. Karen stood frozen for a second, heart pounding, staring at the broken wooden planks, as the strange dog sniffed and pawed at the spot insistently, whining as if pleading with her to act quickly. The abandoned construction site was quiet, except for the creaking of rusted beams swaying in the wind and the distant caw of a crow, perched high on a concrete slab. Her hands trembled as she dropped to her knees and began moving the splintered wood, splinters digging into her palms, the scent of rust, earth and old machinery heavy in the air. Then she saw it, a small hand, dirty and motionless, sticking out from the debris. Her heart leapt in her chest. "Oh my God," she gasped, voice shaking. "There's someone here." She scrambled for her phone, her fingers fumbling the screen, dialing emergency services with desperation. "There's a child," she told them breathlessly. "A child under rubble. Please hurry." She didn't wait. She couldn't. Ignoring the sharp sting of splinters and the dust choking her breath, she dug, plank after plank, her muscles screaming with effort, sweat mixing with tears. Finally, she cleared enough to see a frail, dirt-covered face, with a gash on the forehead, eyes fluttering open weakly. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now. Help is coming." The boy barely moved but managed a soft whisper. "Leo, my name is Leo." She smiled through her tears, brushing dust from his forehead. "Hi Leo, I'm Karen. I'm here now." His voice trembled, barely audible. "The bad men, they were chasing me. I hid here. I didn't mean to fall, I was so scared." Her heart shattered. She gently took his tiny hand, squeezing it with all the warmth she could muster. "You're not alone anymore," she said, blinking away tears. The dog sat close, tail still, ears perked, eyes on Leo as if protecting him. Minutes felt like hours, until sirens pierced the silence. Paramedics arrived with stretchers and tools, and Karen stepped back as they lifted Leo gently from the wreckage. He cried out in pain, but Karen stayed close, whispering, "You're brave. You're going to be okay." One paramedic turned to her. "You saved his life," he said with quiet awe. But Karen shook her head, looking down at the dog. "He did." The dog wagged his tail once, silently. As they loaded Leo into the ambulance, Karen noticed something odd. Leo clutched a torn drawing in his hand, a child's sketch of a smiling woman and a house. He held it tight even as he was given oxygen. Karen looked closer and felt a chill. The woman in the drawing looked like her. Confused, she stepped back, trying to make sense of it. Had he seen her before? Was it coincidence or something else? The paramedics pulled away, and she watched the ambulance lights fade into the distance. The dog nuzzled her hand. "What are you?" she whispered to it, kneeling down. It simply looked at her with eyes too deep for any ordinary dog. Her phone buzzed. It was the hospital. "He's stable," the nurse said, "but he keeps asking for you." Karen's chest tightened. "Okay," she replied softly, already heading toward her car. She brought the dog along, not knowing why she trusted it so deeply, but feeling that it had brought her into something much larger than herself. At the hospital, she was led to Leo's room. He was hooked to machines, his face pale but peaceful. When he saw her, he smiled weakly. "You're real," he said. "I knew you would come." Karen knelt beside him. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. Leo looked around nervously and whispered, The dreams, I saw you before the bad men came, you had a red scarf, and you smiled at me. I knew you would find me. Karen's eyes welled with tears. She had worn a red scarf this morning. She didn't know how to respond. You're safe now, she said again, brushing his hair back. No one will hurt you. But her mind was spinning. Who were the bad men? Why was this child hiding here? And how had he drawn her before they had even met? The dog curled up in the hospital hallway, silent and watchful. Over the next few days, Karen visited Leo every day. The boy grew stronger, but never stopped drawing. Page after page, sketches of a dark van, of men with covered faces, of running through trees, of hiding under broken planks, and always pictures of Karen with the strange dog beside her. It was as if he had known them all his life. Then one morning, police officers came to the hospital. They had found the van Leo had drawn, abandoned near the woods. Inside were rope, tape, and photos of other children. It wasn't just Leo. They had been hunting more kids. Karen's stomach turned. One officer sat with her. And Leo, your drawings helped us, he said. We think we can track the rest of them down. Leo looked proud but afraid. Will they come back? He asked. The officer shook his head. Not if we can help it. Karen held Leo's hand. I won't let anything happen to you. That night she walked the hospital halls, unable to sleep. The dog followed silently. She sat on a bench by a window, staring out at the moon. Why me? She asked the dog. It tilted its head. She didn't expect an answer, but deep down she felt it. This wasn't random. The dog had led her here, for a reason. Somehow, Leo was connected to her. The next day a woman came to the hospital, claiming to be Leo's aunt, but Leo hid behind Karen when he saw her. She's not my aunt, he whispered. She was with. Karen alerted the police, who discovered the woman had a fake ID. She was arrested on the spot. Leo clung to Karen, crying, Don't let them take me, he begged. Please. Karen promised she wouldn't. Social services got involved, but even they seemed unsure where Leo belonged. There was no record of him at any school, no birth certificate found yet. It was like he had appeared out of nowhere. Karen offered to foster him, at least temporarily. He trusts me, she said simply. The officials hesitated, but agreed, given the unusual circumstance. Leo came home with her, and the dog too, never straying far. At night, Leo had nightmares. Karen would hold his hand until he calmed down. Some nights, he'd whisper, I'm glad you found me, and every time, Karen would answer, me too. Yet she still didn't understand what was happening, why she felt so deeply tied to this child. One evening, while cleaning out a closet, she found an old photo album from her childhood. Flipping through it she froze. There, in one photo, was a little boy standing in the background. He looked just like Leo. Her fingers trembled as she traced his face. The picture was taken when she was 10 years old. She didn't remember him. She showed Leo the photo. He stared at it for a long time. That was me, he whispered. I was lost for a long time. Karen's breath caught in her throat. How? She asked, voice barely audible. Leo didn't answer. He just hugged her, and the dog sat beside them, silent, watching, as if it had always known. Karen stood still for a moment after hanging up the phone. The number she'd dialed still burned into her mind. The voice on the other end had trembled with a mix of panic, relief, and something else. A quiet kind of fear that didn't match a mother simply finding her lost child. Sarah, Leo's mother, had thanked her over and over again, asking where she could meet Karen to get Leo, but Karen didn't give an exact location just yet. She didn't know why, but something inside her told her to be cautious. She looked down at the backpack again, Leo's name written in small, neat letters on the inner flap. Inside were several crumpled drawings, made with dull crayons, the kind a kid would find in a waiting room. One picture showed a house with a sad boy in the window. Another showed what looked like a dog, though its eyes were wide and human-like, and it had tears drawn under them. The last picture was the one that made Karen's heart tighten the most. A group of tall black stick figures, with red hands, and no faces, standing behind the same boy, who had drawn himself with a small red heart, and a broken smile. She didn't understand them, not fully, but she understood pain, and whatever this boy had gone through, it hadn't been ordinary. Karen returned to the cabin where Leo was now sleeping, curled up on the old couch, wrapped in a blanket, the strange dog lying close beside him, as though guarding him. The boy had barely spoken after she brought him inside, but he'd clung to her like someone drowning, and every time he stirred in his sleep, he whispered things, fragments of memories. Maybe, they locked the door, he muttered once, and another time, don't let them take me. She didn't know what to do. She was just a woman who liked her quiet life in the woods, with no plans to ever get involved in someone else's mess. But now that Leo was here, her heart wouldn't let her look away. She sat down near the couch and watched him breathe, slow and uneven, and then looked at the dog, who watched her back with eyes that were too knowing, too sad. "Who are you really?" she asked the dog. But of course, it didn't. The next morning, Leo awoke with a jolt, his eyes wide and full of fear. He looked around wildly, until he saw Karen, then scrambled off the couch, and into her arms. "I thought they took you," he whispered. "Who?" Karen asked gently, stroking his tangled hair. He hesitated. "The bad men, the ones from the big house. They say I belong to them." Karen pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "What house?" she asked softly. "Where?" Leo looked down. "I don't know the name, but it was always cold, and they made me sleep in a room with no window. They said I had to stay because of the gift." Karen felt a chill creep up her spine. "What gift, sweetheart?" Leo looked toward the dog, who was now sitting up, alert. "I can see things. I dream them, sometimes before they happen, sometimes after. They said I'm special. They said the dog was part of it too. They said we had to stay together." Karen tried to keep her expression calm, but inside she was spiraling. Was this some cult, some experiment? She didn't know what she believed, but she knew the fear in this boy was real. Leo clung to her again, pressing his face into her shoulder. "The dog came to me in the dreams first. Then, one day it was just there, in real life. It found me, it helps me, it kept me alive." Karen felt the weight of something larger than herself settling on her shoulders. She stood up, holding Leo's hand, and went outside with him and the dog, hoping the morning sun might help clear her thoughts. But even in the light, everything felt heavy. She saw movement by the trees, a shadow that didn't belong, and quickly ushered Leo and the dog back inside. She locked the door, her heart pounding. Someone had been watching. She didn't know if it was one of them, but she knew she didn't feel safe anymore. That evening, she called Sarah again, and asked her to meet in a public place, a diner in town, so she could talk to her face to face. Sarah agreed quickly, almost too quickly. When Karen and Leo arrived, Sarah was already there, sitting at a booth with shaking hands. The moment she saw Leo, she rushed to him, but he stepped behind Karen, hiding. "You're my mom," he whispered. "But you left me there." Sarah burst into tears, trying to hold him, but he didn't move. "I didn't want to," she said through sobs. "They made me. They said they'd hurt you if I tried to take you. They said you were chosen." Karen sat across from her, trying to understand. "Who are they?" Sarah looked around nervously. "They're rich, powerful. They have a house outside of town, hidden behind old gates. It looks abandoned, but it's not. They bring children there. Children like Leo, children who see things, they say it's a gift from God, but what they do to them, it's not holy." Karen's stomach turned. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Some of them are in on it. I tried. They made me disappear, for a week just to remind me. When I came back, I kept quiet. I thought he was safe as long as I obeyed. I didn't know he'd escape." Leo stood quietly, still holding Karen's hand. "The dog helped me," he said. "It showed me the path in a dream. Then it was real." Sarah looked at the dog for the first time, her face softening. "He's the guardian," she whispered. "They talked about him, said he was the oldest secret, that if the dog left, the boy's gift would grow, and they couldn't control it anymore." Karen looked at Leo, who looked back at her with a calm she hadn't seen before. "Do you want to go back with her?" she asked him gently. He shook his head. "I want to stay with you. You're not afraid?" Karen didn't know what the right answer was, but she nodded. She looked at Sarah. Then he stays with me. For now. Sarah wiped her tears and nodded slowly. Please protect him. I'll do what I can from my side. Just don't let them find him again. As they left the diner, Karen felt eyes on her once more, but this time, she didn't feel help. She had Leo, and she had the dog, and even though she didn't understand the full story yet, she knew it wasn't over. She also knew that some secrets weren't meant to stay buried, and whatever the boy's gift was, whatever darkness had chased him into her life, she would face it, because now, he was hers to protect. And some love, the kind that finds you when you least expect it, is stronger than fear. Karen stood in the cold morning light, her heart still heavy from what they had uncovered the day before. The air smelled of damp soil and secrets. The loyal dog, who never left her side, wagged its tail softly, alert and ready. They returned to the site, an old abandoned cabin, nestled between the whispering trees, where everything had started to feel more like a puzzle than a coincidence. The cabin looked empty, forgotten, but Karen had learned that appearances could lie. She scanned the ground carefully, while the dog sniffed through the rubble and weeds. That's when she spotted it. A small torn piece of red fabric, caught on a rusty nail jutting from the wooden doorway. Karen knelt down, fingers trembling, as she pulled it free. The cloth was thin, like it belonged to a child's shirt. Her heart clenched. A memory surged. Her brother wore red that day. Her fingers closed tighter around the fabric as she blinked back tears. Just as she stood, the dog barked sharply. She turned and followed his gaze to a small metal object, half buried in the mud. She picked it up. An old-fashioned key, small, delicate, with the number 312 etched faintly into its side. What could this open? She whispered to herself. But there was no answer, only the soft wind pushing through the trees like a whisper of warning. Suddenly, she felt it, a strange sensation on the back of her neck, like someone watching. Slowly, she turned, her breath caught. At the edge of the clearing stood a man, dressed in dark clothes, unmoving, his face partly hidden under a cap. He didn't speak, didn't approach, he just watched. Karen stared back, fear crawling up her spine. The dog growled low, its body tense. The man tilted his head slightly, then turned and disappeared into the woods, as if he had never been there. Karen's knees felt weak. Who was he, and why was he watching her? She clutched the key and the fabric, knowing these pieces meant something bigger. Someone didn't want her to find the truth. The clues weren't just hidden, they were protected. Every step she took felt like she was walking deeper into something she couldn't yet name. The dog whined softly and nudged her hand, as if to say, "Keep going." She nodded slowly, more to herself than to him. She didn't have a choice now. She pocketed the key and fabric, her mind racing. The number 312. It could be anything. A room, a locker, a safe. But she had seen those numbers before. She was sure of it. Somewhere in her past, buried in the fog of memory, that number had once meant something. She tried to focus, to remember, but it was like trying to catch smoke. She walked back toward town, the dog by her side, glancing over her shoulder now and then, but the man was gone. Still the feeling lingered. At home, Karen laid the key and the fabric on the table. Her hands hovered over them, as if they might vanish. She pulled out a box of old photographs and school records, searching for any hint, any lead, page after page, memory after memory, until she froze. There it was, a photo from when she was 9 years old, her brother standing in front of a school locker, the number 312 painted on the door behind him. Her breath hitched. Could the key belong to that locker? But the school had closed years ago, and the building had been abandoned. Still, it was a place to start. She grabbed her coat. As she left, the dog barked once, and followed. The school loomed like a ghost, silent and heavy with time. Boards covered the windows, and vines clawed at the walls. Karen and the dog squeezed through a broken side door. The halls inside smelled of dust and old paper, and their footsteps echoed too loudly. She found the old locker hallway. Her heart pounded with each step. There it was, locker 312, its paint chipped, its surface scarred. Her fingers shook as she slid the key into the lock. It clicked. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a box, wooden and worn, with a photo taped to the lid. She pulled it out. Another photo of her brother, younger, with a man standing behind him, the same man who had watched her in the forest. Her heart dropped. This wasn't just about a missing brother. This was something darker. Inside the box, she found letters, notes in a language she didn't fully understand, symbols drawn in the margins, newspaper clippings of missing children from years past. It was overwhelming. She sat on the floor, reading, tears falling freely now. Her brother had tried to tell someone. He had tried to leave a trail, and now, years later, she was following it. The dog lay beside her, quiet and patient. She stroked his head, grounding herself in the present. Every word she read pulled her further into a truth that had been buried too long. When she finally stood, the sky outside had darkened. She left the school with the box clutched tightly to her chest. She no longer just wanted answers. She needed them. The man in the forest was real. The clues were real. And somewhere out there, the final piece of the puzzle waited. She couldn't stop now. She wouldn't. Karen burst through the hospital doors with panic in her heart and worry in her eyes, her feet moving fast down the long sterile hallway as she searched for Leo's room, each step echoing like a warning bell in his ears, her chest tight with fear, not just because Leo was hurt, but because something darker now surrounded this situation, something that stretched beyond the accident, beyond the fear of sickness, into a realm of danger that none of them had ever imagined. When she finally saw him, pale and bandaged but alive, she rushed to his side and held his hand so tightly it trembled in hers, as if trying to tell him through her grip that she would never let anything happen to him again. Not ever, no matter what, no matter who tried to hurt him. But before she could Sarah stood at the corner of the room, with a face full of guilt and a voice low with fear and secrets, her eyes darting to the closed door behind them, as if someone could be listening even now, and she began to speak in a whisper that carried heavy weight, revealing that her ex-husband wasn't just cruel or careless, but dangerous, in ways she had never spoken about before, involved in activities and connections that scared her even now, the kind of people who didn't forget, who didn't forgive, and who didn't leave things unfinished. And she believed, truly believed, that now those people thought she had something they wanted, or worse, thought Leo did, or that Leo had seen something he shouldn't have seen, and her voice cracked as she explained that she had gone into hiding years ago, or a reason, changed her name, moved towns, started a quiet life in the hopes of escaping that world, but now it seemed the past had found her again, and Karen listened with growing horror as she realized the accident might not have been an accident, that Leo's presence here, his survival, could be a threat to someone's, and suddenly everything seemed more fragile, more urgent, and just then Leo, still weak and drowsy from the medication, opened his eyes slowly and looked at them both, confusion written across his bruised face, and whispered that he had seen a man outside the hospital the night before, standing under the flickering streetlight near the ambulance bay, just standing there and watching the building, not moving, not blinking, and that something about the man had made his stomach twist, like his instincts were screaming at him, that the man didn't belong, and when he looked again, the man was gone, just like that, vanished into the night. But Leo hadn't forgotten his face, a face he couldn't quite place, but that made his skin crawl and heart race, in a way he couldn't explain, and Karen felt the cold weight of realization settle in her chest, because if Leo was right, then they weren't safe here, not at all, not even in a hospital surrounded by cameras and staff and security, and without a moment's hesitation, she stood up, her voice sharp with authority and fear, ordering that the hospital go into lockdown immediately, telling the nurses and guards that there was a credible threat, that the safety of the patients was in danger, and they must act now, and the hospital lights dimmed slightly as the lockdown protocol was initiated, the automatic doors sealing shut, security being deployed to every entrance and hallway, and Karen stayed by Leo's side, never letting go of his hand, her heart racing as she scanned every shadow, every movement, wondering if the man was already inside, hiding, waiting, and Sarah sank into a chair in the corner, burying her face in her hands, whispering apologies to a boy who didn't deserve any of this, while outside the hospital, under the deep blue of the night sky, a figure stood hidden behind a parked car, watching the building with a stillness that was almost inhuman, his eyes cold and calculated as if he was waiting for something, or someone, and though the hospital was locked down and lights glared across the pavement, he didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there like a ghost of Sarah's past, come back to haunt the present, and inside, Leo tried to stay awake, tried to be brave, but the fear was growing inside him, not just because of the man he saw, but because of the way his mother and Sarah looked at each other now, as if this wasn't just a moment of danger, but the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything. And he didn't understand it all, didn't know why someone would want to hurt him, or his family, but he knew one thing, whatever was happening, whatever storm was coming, he wasn't going to face it alone. As his mother squeezed his hand tighter and whispered promises that she would protect him with everything she had, even if it cost her everything, Leo closed his eyes again, not because he was giving up, but because he needed his strength for whatever came next, because deep down, he felt that the strange dog, the accident, the man outside, they were all part of something connected, something terrible, and maybe, just maybe, that strange dog hadn't come into their lives by accident, maybe it was trying to help, maybe it knew this danger was coming all along, and with that final thought, Leo drifted into sleep, while Karen stood like a soldier by his side, eyes open, mind racing, her heart heavy with fear, but burning with determination, knowing she had no choice now but to fight for her son, and to uncover the truth before the shadows took everything from them again. The key was heavier than it looked, cold in Karen's hand, its jagged edges pressing into her skin, as she stood in front of the old, rusted gate of the downtown storage facility. The rain had started again, light at first, then harder, as if the sky itself wanted to wash away what she was about to discover. She entered the key into Unit 47B, her breath hitching, as the latch gave way with a metallic click that seemed to echo through the empty aisles. The roll-up door creaked and groaned like a dying animal, and for a moment she thought she might be sick. Inside it was dark except for the sliver of light from the open door, but she could see rows of boxes, a metal cabinet, a dusty desk, and in the corner, a stack of TV monitors, old, bulky ones, still faintly humming. She reached toward the closest monitor and pressed a button. A screen lit up with static, then an image flickered into view. Sarah, standing outside her apartment, looking around nervously before entering. Karen stepped back, her heart pounding. She pressed another button. Leo leaving the shelter, stuffing something into his jacket. Another screen showed herself, her to a stranger in the supermarket aisle. Her hands began to shake. "What is this?" she whispered to no one, the cold silence swallowing her voice. She turned to the boxes and opened one. Inside were folders, hundreds of them, each labeled with names, dates, locations, photos clipped to the front, handwritten notes in red ink, timelines. One had her name on it. She opened it and felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Photos of her with her mom, with Sarah, alone in her car, at the park, even in her bedroom. Some were from years ago. They had been watching her long before Leo showed up. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about just Sarah either. She wasn't some innocent bystander caught in their drama. She was the target. She stumbled back, knocking over a box. It burst open, spilling stacks of $100 bills and several passports. Her photo was on one of them, but the name wasn't hers. There were weapons too, 3 handguns, a small black rifle, boxes of ammunition. She touched nothing, afraid her fingerprints would be on everything. "What the hell is going on?" she muttered, tears stinging her eyes. She turned to the metal cabinet, yanking it open. Inside were more tapes labeled with dates and initials. In the back, a small hard drive in a foam-lined case. She didn't know why she took it. Instinct maybe, but she slipped it into her coat pocket. The rain grew louder outside, slapping against the concrete like angry applause. She grabbed one of the folders at random and flipped through it. It was about someone named Ellen F., a woman who had gone missing 5 years ago, last seen leaving a coffee shop just 2 blocks from where Karen used to work. Her photo showed her holding a little girl, smiling carefree. That folder had terminated stamped across it, in thick black letters. Karen dropped it like it burned her. Whoever ran this place wasn't just watching people, they were doing something to them. She backed away slowly, trying to breathe. She wanted to scream, but couldn't make a sound. She needed to get out, but as she reached the door, something caught her eye, a small picture taped to the side of the desk. It was Leo Younger, wearing a military uniform, standing next to a man Karen didn't recognize. On the back, written in fading ink, Project Aegis, Phase 2. Her mind raced. Was Leo part of this? Was he running from them, or was he leading her into a trap? She didn't know what to believe anymore. Her whole life had started to feel like a stage, and she was the only one who didn't know she was being watched. She left the unit, pulling the door down behind her, locking it again with shaking hands. She walked back through the rain, not caring that she was soaked, the folder in her hand like a ticking bomb. Back in her car, she started the engine and sat there staring at the windshield. Everything had changed. Her memories didn't feel like hers anymore. She looked around, wondering if there was a camera nearby, recording her reaction. Of course there was. Of course someone was watching. She turned on the heater, trying to calm herself, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The hard drive in her coat seemed to pulse with weight. She had to find out what was on it. She had to know how deep this went. She thought of Sarah, of Leo, of her mother's warnings, and her father's silence. She thought of all the times she'd felt watched, and brushed it off as paranoia. It had never been in her head. They had been there the whole time. The walls were closing in. This wasn't just some conspiracy. This was real. It was happening, and she was in the middle of it. She put the car in drive, but didn't know where to go. Home didn't feel safe. Nowhere. She needed help. She needed answers. But more than anything, she needed the truth, no matter how terrifying it was. Because after everything she'd seen in that unit, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. None of them were safe anymore. Not her, not Sarah, not Leah. And the more she remembered, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the first time she'd been here. Maybe the game had restarted, and she was just now waking up. A growing threat. After the tense events at the storage unit, Leo's heart never seemed to find peace. The world around him felt darker, heavier, as if an invisible shadow was following every step he took. The bad men, the ones who had chased them before, were no longer just strangers in the distance. Leo saw one of them again, a cold face he recognized from the nightmares that visited him at night. It was a face filled with menace and cruel determination, a reminder that the danger had not vanished. Karen's team, understanding the urgency of the situation, decided they had to act fast. They moved Sarah and Leo away from the city's noise and prying eyes, taking them deep into the woods, to a safe house hidden among the tall trees and thick undergrowth. The woods felt like a refuge at first, quiet, calm, and far from the chaos they had escaped. But the peace was fragile, a thin veil over the growing threat that followed them like a storm cloud ready to burst. As they traveled, their convoy was suddenly ambushed. The bad men had found them. Despite all the careful planning and secrecy, the attack was swift and brutal. Cars screeched to a halt. The sharp bark of orders and the rattle of weapons filled the air. Leo's breath caught in his throat as the chase began. Karen's team pushed forward, determined to protect Sarah and Leo, but the danger was closing in fast. The forest roads twisted and turned like a labyrinth, the headlights cutting through the dense night fog, as tires skidded and dirt flew up behind them. Leo's mind raced with fear and hope, unsure which feeling was stronger. He could hear Sarah's quiet sobs from the back seat, and Karen's voice over the radio, calm but tense, telling the team to stay focused. Every moment felt stretched, like time itself was holding its breath. The bad men were relentless, their intent clear. They would not stop until Leo and Sarah were caught. Suddenly, just when it seemed the darkness would swallow them whole, flashing blue and red lights appeared through the trees. Police cars burst onto the scene, sirens wailing a fierce promise of safety. Officers jumped out, forming a barrier between the pursuers and the safe house. Bullets tore through the air, but the law enforcement was ready, coordinated and strong. The chase ended with a flurry of action, bad men caught off guard, some running, others surrendering as the police took control. Leo's knees shook as he finally exhaled, the weight of terror easing just a little. But even in that moment of relief, a cold truth settled deep inside him. They were being hunted, and this was only the beginning. The safe house was no longer just a shelter, it was a battleground for their survival. Karen gathered the team, her face grave as she explained that the enemy was more organized than they had imagined. They had enemies not just in the shadows, but within powerful circles, who wanted to keep secrets buried at any cost. Leo and Sarah huddled together, feeling the fragile safety slip through their fingers. Nights in the woods were sleepless, filled with whispered plans and distant sounds that could be danger or just the wind. Each day brought news of another close call, a strange phone call, a face spotted too close to their hideout. Leo's fear grew, but so did his determination. He realized that running was no longer enough. They had to fight back, to find out why they were targets, and to protect each other no matter what. Sarah, despite her own terror, showed strength that surprised Leo. She held his hand, reminding him they were not alone. Karen's team worked tirelessly, setting traps, watching every movement, preparing for what was sure to come next. Leo's thoughts often drifted to the strange dog they had found, a symbol of hope and loyalty in their darkest hours. The dog, now with them in the safe house, seemed to sense the danger too, guarding the small cabin with fierce eyes. The woods, once a place of peace, now felt like a cage, but it was the only place left where Leo could dream of freedom. As days passed, the threat grew closer, and the line between safety and danger blurred. But Leo held on to one truth: as long as they stood together, there was a chance to overcome the growing storm. The bad men might be many, but the courage within Leo, Sarah and Karen's team burned brighter than ever. They would face the threat head-on, with hope in their hearts, and the unbreakable bond of those who refused to give up. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for their future, for the chance to live without fear, for the hope of a new beginning beyond the shadows that chased them. Karen's team arrived at Sarah's old house, just as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet street. The house had stood empty for months, its windows dusty and its paint peeling, yet it still held an eerie sense of life, as if the walls themselves whispered forgotten stories. Karen stepped carefully through the creaking front door, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. She knew this place was the key to everything, but she was not prepared for what they would find inside. The team spread out, searching every room with precision, their flashlights piercing the gathering darkness. Dust floated in the stale air, and the silence was broken only by the soft footsteps and quiet murmurs as they sifted through old furniture, stacks of forgotten papers, and boxes of mementos. Then, in the back of the study, behind a loose panel in the wall, Karen's assistant discovered a hidden safe, its metal cold and unyielding to the touch. The safe door resisted their efforts, but finally, with careful tools, it creaked open to reveal a thick, worn ledger. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with meticulous handwriting, names, numbers, payments, dates, and cryptic notes that linked Sarah's family to something far darker than anyone had imagined. Each line told a story of deals struck in shadows, alliances with dangerous people across continents, and a life lived on the edge of the law. Karen's hands trembled as she read through the names, some familiar, others terrifyingly unknown, all connected to a web of international crime that stretched far beyond their small town. It was clear Sarah's late husband had once been deeply involved in this secret world, but the ledger also revealed his desperate attempt to break free. There were notes about hiding money, protecting loved ones, and threats made in the dead of night. It was a story of courage, fear, and sacrifice. The more Karen read, the heavier her heart grew. She thought of Sarah, a woman who had lived her life carrying the weight of this hidden truth, her family's safety always hanging in the balance. Sarah's husband had tried to escape his past, but that past had followed him relentlessly, costing him his life, and leaving his family vulnerable to those who still sought what he had hidden. Karen's mind raced as she realized the danger was far from over. The people listed in the ledger were still out there watching, waiting for a chance to reclaim what had been lost. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a fight to protect innocent lives. As night fell and the team gathered their findings, Karen felt a deep sadness, mixed with a fierce determination. She vowed to uncover every secret, to expose the truth no matter the cost, because in the home of secrets, the past was alive, and it demanded justice. The house, once silent and still, now echoed with the weight of untold stories, stories that could change everything Sarah's family believed about their own history. Karen looked out the window at the darkening sky, and whispered a promise, to keep fighting, to shield the innocent, and to bring light to the shadows that had haunted this home for so long. The road ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges that would test every ounce of courage they had. But Karen knew that some truths were worth the fight, no matter the cost. The ledger, the house, and the memories contained within were not just evidence, they were a testament to the strength of a family caught in the crossfire of a world they never asked to be part of. And so, with a heavy heart but unwavering resolve, Karen prepared to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that the secrets of this home would not remain buried any longer. The past had finally come knocking, and it was up to them to answer. That night, the silence in the safe house was shattered by the sudden sound of breaking glass and heavy footsteps echoing through the darkened halls. Leo's dog, whom he had named Shadow because of the way he silently followed him everywhere, sensed danger immediately. Shadow's low growl filled the room, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, as masked men, dangerous and determined, forced their way inside. The cold rush of fear gripped Sarah's heart when she realized they had been found, and this time there was no escape. Her son clung tightly to her, his small hands trembling, eyes wide with terror, searching for any sign of safety. Sarah held him close, whispering soothing words, though inside she was shaking. Every breath she took was a fight against the rising panic. Shadow sprang forward, his teeth bared, lunging bravely at the intruders, his fierce loyalty shining through despite his small size. The men were caught off guard by the dog's courage, but they quickly recovered, weapons drawn and ready to fight. The battle in the cramped safe house was brutal and unforgiving. Sarah's strength surprised even herself as she pushed back, shielding her son with every ounce of determination she could muster. The air was thick with fear and desperation. Every noise seemed louder, every shadow darker. Just when it seemed the attackers might overwhelm them, a car screeched to a halt outside. Karen and backup burst in, their presence a sudden beacon of hope in the darkest night. They fought alongside Sarah and Leo, their teamwork fierce and unyielding. The masked men, realizing their plan was falling apart, began to retreat, leaving behind a trail of chaos and broken trust. But the scars left on the safe house, on their hearts, ran deep. This night was no longer just about survival. It had become personal. The criminals who had haunted their lives before were now crossing lines they should never have crossed, and Sarah knew that they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Leo's grip tightened on Shadow's collar, his eyes burning with a new fire. Sarah's son, though shaken, looked at his mother and found strength in her arms. Karen, bruised but resolute, vowed silently to protect this family at any cost. Outside, the cold wind whispered threats, carrying the promise that this night was only the beginning of a darker chapter, one filled with fear, fight, and unbreakable bonds. And so, as dawn approached, the safe house stood scarred but unbroken, a symbol of their courage against the storm. Each heartbeat echoed the promise they would face whatever came next, together, no matter the cost, because now it was no longer just about hiding, it was about fighting back, standing strong and protecting the fragile light of hope that still burned in their heart. The broker. The files they had uncovered over the past weeks had all led to one shadowy figure, a man known only as the broker, whispered about in the darkest corners of the underworld, and feared by but known by few. Karen had always thought that if there was a single person responsible for the endless chain of pain, the broken lives, and the stolen futures, it was this man. The broker was not just a name, he was a ghost, a myth, a cruel puppeteer, pulling strings from a hidden place where no one dared to go. Every piece of evidence Karen's team gathered painted a clearer picture of a man who controlled the smuggling ring with ruthless efficiency, a man whose greed and cruelty knew no bounds. The compound they discovered was buried deep in a forgotten forest, far away from prying eyes, surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by men who looked as if they would rather die than let anyone through. But Karen felt a strange mix of fear and determination. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment to finally end the nightmare. As they approached the perimeter, in the dead of night, the weight of everything they had lost pressed down on Karen's heart. She thought about the victims, the children stolen from their homes, the families torn apart, and the countless innocent lives shattered by the broker's greed. She thought about her team, who had risked everything, their lives, their futures, to get this far. Their faces flashed through her mind, each one a story, a reason why they couldn't fail. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant barking of dogs. Karen's hands trembled as she checked her gear, but her voice was steady when she gave the signal. They moved like shadows, silent and precise, each step bringing them closer to the heart of darkness. The compound was larger than they had imagined, a fortress of concrete and steel with cameras watching every inch, alarms ready to scream at the slightest disturbance. But Karen's team was ready. They had trained for this moment, studied every blueprint, memorized every patrol route, every weak spot. The plan was simple yet dangerous: get in, capture the broker, and shut down the entire operation once and for all. But as they infiltrated the compound, Karen felt a gnawing doubt deep inside her. Thought if this was a trap? What if the broker knew they were coming and had prepared a cruel surprise? Her mind flashed back to the countless hours spent poring over evidence, chasing leads that had turned cold, watching innocent people suffer while justice seemed so far away. And now, here they were, at the edge of it all, with a chance to change everything. The team split into two groups, one heading to the control room to disable communications, the other moving toward the main building where the broker was believed to be hiding. The tension was unbearable. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a warning. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she crept through the corridors, the faces of the victims burning in her memory. Suddenly, a door creaked open, and she froze. A figure stepped into the dim light, a man in his 40s with cold eyes that seemed to pierce right through her soul. It was him, the broker. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Karen felt a surge of anger and sadness, a lifetime of pain boiling to the surface. She remembered the little girl who had disappeared, the old man who had lost everything, the countless others who had been crushed by the broker's greed. This man was the cause of so much suffering, yet here he stood, calm and composed as if he held all the power in the world. But Karen knew better. She knew that this man was just a man, vulnerable, and capable of fear like anyone else. She stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's over. We have the evidence. And we're taking you down." The broker smiled, a cruel, bitter smile. "You think this ends with me? There's always someone else. The game never stops." Karen felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. She had dreamed of this day for so long, but now that it was here, she realized it was just the beginning. The fight, to heal the wounds, to rebuild the lives broken by this darkness, was only starting. Her team moved in quickly, and after a tense struggle, they subdued the broker. As they led him away, Karen looked back at the compound one last time. The shadows that had once seemed so impenetrable were breaking apart, and for the first time she felt a flicker of hope that justice could be served, that the victims could find peace, and that the darkness could be chased away by the light. But she also knew the road ahead would be long and painful. There would be trials, there would be losses, and there would be moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Yet, Karen was ready, for herself, for her team, for every broken soul they had promised to save. She was ready to fight on, because in the end, that was what truly mattered, not just capturing the broker, but healing the wounds he had left behind, and building a future where no one would live in fear again. The files, the secret compound, the night of reckoning, it all led to this moment, a moment of truth, pain and hope intertwined. And as Karen walked away from the compound, handcuffs tight on the broker's wrists, she whispered a silent promise to the victims she carried in her heart. "This is only the beginning. We will never stop fighting." The final raid. The storm clouds gathered above the compound, like a dark omen, casting a heavy, oppressive weight on Karen's chest. The air was thick with tension. Every breath she took a struggle between the fear of failure and the determination that had fueled her for months. The mission was simple in theory: raid the compound, capture the broker, end his reign of terror. But Karen knew better than anyone that simple missions were the most dangerous. They could be misleading, a trap disguised as something easy. But this was the moment they had been waiting for. She glanced at her team, a mix of seasoned officers, each one as worn and battle-hardened as she was. They had seen too much, sacrificed too much, and yet still they trusted her. Still they followed her. In the distance the compound loomed, a fortress of steel and concrete that held the dark secrets they had been chasing for so long. Each step Karen took toward it felt like a recipe in the deafening silence of the night. Her hand hovered over the gun holstered at her side, but it was her mind that was the sharpest weapon. They had prepared for every contingency, every possible outcome. The broker would not escape this time. The gates creaked open, and they moved as one, fast, silent, efficient. The outer walls of the compound were breached in mere moments, and they quickly fanned out, covering each exit, securing each corner. But Karen's heart raced as they moved deeper inside. Something didn't feel right. The broker had known they were coming. She was sure of it. A sinking feeling tugged at her gut, but she pushed it aside. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. They reached the heart of the compound, the broker's lair. It was eerily quiet inside, the silence only broken by the distant hum of machinery. The walls were bare, stripped of any signs of life or humanity. It was as if this place had never been a home, never been a refuge, just a cold, sterile operating room for something dark and twisted. And there he was, sitting at a desk in the center of the room, the broker. His eyes, cold and calculating, met Karen's with an unnerving calmness. His lips curled into a smirk, like he had been expecting them all along. Karen's pulse quickened, but she didn't let her fear show. This was it, the moment she had been working for, the moment her team had risked everything for. She stepped forward, and in a low voice, she said, "It's over." The broker didn't flinch. Instead, he laughed softly, his voice laced with contempt. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he warned. The words sent a shiver down Karen's spine, but she didn't back down. She couldn't. She had come too far, lost too much to stop now. She motioned to her team, who swiftly moved in, securing the room and cuffing the broker. But even as they led him away, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had won, they had won, but the broker's warning hung in the air like a curse. Karen glanced at her team, her heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. This wasn't the end. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. The broker had been just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and his capture was only the beginning. As the team filed out of the compound, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows on the ground. Karen allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the bittersweet taste of victory. But in her gut, there was a gnawing sense of unfinished business. They had captured the broker, yes. They had shut down his operation, yes. But what about everything else? What about the network of people who had supported him, the system he had built? What about the victims whose lives had been ruined, their hopes shattered by his schemes? Karen couldn't let it go. She couldn't rest until she knew the full extent of the damage he had caused. She couldn't rest until she knew the truth. As the team loaded into the van, the broker's face came back to her mind, the smugness, the arrogance, the quiet confidence that had been unshaken by their arrival. It haunted her. It gnawed at her like a shadow she couldn't shake. What had he meant by his warning? Was there something more she needed to know? She glanced out the window, her mind racing. The world was still dark, but the first rays of light pierced through the clouds, and for the first time in months, Karen allowed herself a small flicker of hope. This was a victory. It wasn't the end, but it was a step toward something better, a step toward justice, a step toward peace, and she would take that step. She would fight for it, even if it meant stepping into the darkness again. She would see this through to the end. The broker had been the key to something much bigger, something far more dangerous, and Karen had to uncover it. The game had changed, but so had she, and now the real battle was about to begin. Even after his arrest, the sense of finality was short-lived. The threat hadn't been eliminated. It had only evolved, shifting like a shadow, stretching itself into the deepest corners of their lives. A new encrypted plan, one whispered in dark corners of the underworld, emerged, a devastatingly efficient strategy, named Reclamation Protocol. And its purpose was clear: to erase anyone who had dared to expose the truth. No one was safe. Leo, despite his arrest, had become an even more important target. The very people who wanted him silenced weren't finished with him yet. As the days passed, the tension hung thick, like the heavy air before a storm, until it happened again. Masked attackers, their faces obscured by the fabric of fear itself, launched a brutal assault on the safe house. Their mission was simple: destroy, kill, and erase any trace of resistance. As the first wave of invaders crashed through the windows, chaos erupted. The soft hum of the night was shattered by the sounds of violent footsteps and shouts, as the air turned thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Leo, still recovering from the aftermath of his earlier ordeal, was thrown into the fray, fear and confusion rushing through him. But amidst the madness, a calm, unwavering presence materialized. Shadow. Without hesitation, Shadow acted, his every move deliberate and precise. Leo, helpless and vulnerable, found himself pulled to safety in the midst of the Shadow's grip was firm, his eyes sharp with the instinct of survival, as he shielded Leo from the oncoming onslaught. Each second that passed was a dance with death, but Shadow remained steady, determined to protect Leo at any cost. Meanwhile, Karen, fierce and relentless, fought with the kind of raw, unyielding strength only someone with everything to lose could possess. The attackers were numerous, but Karen was a force of nature, swift, decisive, and unafraid. She moved with precision, every kick and punch delivered with the kind of fury born from desperation and a desire to keep her family safe. Blood dripped from her hands, but her resolve was unbreakable. The clash of metal, the crash of bodies slamming into walls, the growls of men struggling to maintain control. It was a battle unlike any they had faced before. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. Each action, each move was life or death. And yet, despite the sheer numbers of their attackers, they held their ground. Shadow, who had always been the silent guardian, had never fought so hard. Leo, who had always been the innocent bystander, found himself fighting for his own survival. Karen, who had always been the backbone of their small unit, found herself stretched to the limits of endurance. They were all pushed to their breaking point, but still they fought on. Time seemed to stretch and warp, every second feeling like an eternity. For a brief moment it seemed like the invaders might win. A sharp pain lanced through Karen's side as one of the attackers managed to strike a blow, but she didn't falter. She gritted her teeth and pressed on, refusing to let them take her down. In those moments of desperation, when it seemed like hope might slip away, the bond between them held stronger than any weapon. Shadow's presence, his unflinching focus on Leo, gave him the courage to keep moving, to keep fighting. Karen's fierce determination pushed her to rise above her pain and continue the fight. Together, they were more than just survivors. They were a unit, a family forged in the fire of their shared struggle. And just when it seemed like the night would consume them whole, the attackers began to retreat, their mission unsuccessful, their bloodied bodies dragging themselves away into the darkness from which they had come. It was over, for now, but the damage was done. The safe house, once a sanctuary, was now a shattered wreck. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of gunpowder, and yet the silence that followed the chaos was almost as deafening as the battle itself. They had survived, but just barely, bruised, battered, and broken in some ways, but still alive. Leo, his heart racing, looked at Karen and Shadow, his gratitude unspoken, but overflowing in his eyes. They had protected him, even when the odds were stacked against them. They had fought for each other, for their lives, for their but this was only a brief reprieve. The reclamation protocol was still out there, waiting for its next move. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As the light of dawn slowly crept into the room, casting a pale glow on their faces, there was a quiet understanding between them. This was only the beginning. They had survived the night, but the path ahead was filled with even more danger, more uncertainty. But they would face it together. They had no other choice, and as long as they stood united, there was hope, however small, that they might just be able to fight back, to retaliate against the darkness that was determined to swallow them whole. Justice and hope. The moment Karen had been waiting for finally arrived. With the new data she and her team had painstakingly gathered, they were able to dismantle the last remnants of the criminal network that had caused so much pain and suffering. For months, Karen had followed every lead, deciphering codes, tracking down contacts, and piecing together a complicated web of deceit. The criminals, once elusive and untouchable, were now being arrested one by one. But while Karen had always believed in the pursuit of justice, this moment felt different. It was not just a victory over those who had done harm, but a victory for Leo and Sarah, two people who had been forced into hiding, forced to live in fear, forced to lose so much. Their torment had come to an end, and with it, the hope of a better life. Leo and Sarah, with the weight of their past finally lifted from their shoulders, began to rebuild. Every day was a step forward, but it wasn't easy. The scars from the years of fear and uncertainty ran deep, and it would take time they hadn't had before, to learn to trust again, to believe in the future. But they had each other, they had love, they had hope. Slowly, quietly, they started to reclaim the pieces of their lives. Karen, now more than just a hero to them, stayed in touch with the family. She checked in regularly, offering both emotional and practical support. It was clear that they had become more than just victims to her. They were family now. Leo would always remember her, her tireless determination, her quiet strength, and of course Shadow, the mysterious dog, who had watched over them since the beginning. Shadow had never been just a pet. In many ways, the dog had been their silent protector, the one who had never left their side. It was as if Shadow had understood the weight of their struggle, and through it all had stayed close, offering comfort in the most unexpected ways. Shadow's presence had been a strange but steady anchor in their lives, and as time went on, it became clear that there was something truly special about the bond the dog shared with Leo and Sarah. In one quiet evening, after everything had settled, Karen found herself standing on a hill overlooking the town. The sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, the sun dipping slowly behind the horizon. The world around her was still, peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, Karen allowed herself to breathe deeply. She had spent so much time chasing down criminals, solving cases, and righting wrongs, that she had never really taken the time to enjoy the peace she had fought so hard to achieve. But tonight, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, Karen felt something shift inside her. She allowed herself a small smile, something genuine and quiet. It wasn't the grin of someone who had just won a battle, it was the smile of someone who had finally found peace. For all the pain and hardship they had endured, they had made it through. Justice had been served, but more importantly, hope had returned. Karen thought of Leo and Sarah, of how they would continue to rebuild their lives, and of Shadow, who would never leave their side. And in that moment, she realized that her role in their lives was not over. She would always be there for them, a silent guardian in the background, offering whatever support they needed. But for now, as she stood there watching the sunset, Karen allowed herself to She allowed herself to rest in the knowledge that they had made a difference, that she had made a difference. The darkness had been chased away, and in its place was the promise of something better. Hope. The future was uncertain, yes, but in that still moment, Karen believed with all her heart that there was always hope, always a chance to rebuild, always the possibility of a new beginning. And as the stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling softly above her, Karen whispered a silent promise to herself, to never give up, to always keep fighting for justice, and to always, no matter how hard things might get, hold on to hope. Leo, Sarah and Shadow, though far from perfect, had created a family built on resilience, love, and the shared knowledge that they would always be there for each other, and that, more than anything, was what truly mattered. The criminal network was gone, but the work was far from over. There were other families, other people who needed saving, and Karen was more determined than ever to continue her fight. As she turned away from the sunset and began walking back toward her car, she felt lighter, stronger. The sun had set, but the stars above reminded her that the darkness was never permanent. Justice had been served, hope had been restored, and the future was theirs to shape together.